So I've obviously been cutting a lot of Wolverine clips lately, and naturally I found myself stopping my work to watch random scenes from the original X-Men trilogy. You know, those superhero movies that were just as important and influential as the Raimi Spider-Man movies, except they were directed by a conniving, malicious predator, so now nobody talks about them for fear of dredging up Bryan Singer's rightfully tarnished legacy. In a recent interview with The Guardian, Jackman finally addressed the long-running bevy of allegations against Singer and the notion that Singer's behaviour tainted the legacy of those films in popular culture. I think it's fair to say that there are some stories, you know, I think there are some ways of being on set that would not happen now, and I think that things have changed for the better. Similarly to Joss Whedon, it is unfortunately true that arseholes can make great art. Singer's work on the first two X-Men films are no exception. The director's behaviour cannot be excused, and his attempts to downplay or outright ignore the numerous stories surrounding him have only further plunged his work into relative obscurity. X2 in particular is one of the best superhero films ever made. I'm sorry to say. It's perfectly paced, satisfyingly dark, and tops the first film in just about every way. The third film is a completely different beast. Singer of course left the X franchise to go and do Superman Returns, meaning the in-development third film was left without a director close to going into production. Matthew Vaughn got involved, but left because he didn't feel he had enough prep time. Ironic then that he would go on to turn around X-Men First Class in less than a year and made it one of the best X-Men films ever.
I prefer Magneto.
Next up was Rush Hour's Brett Ratner, another director with a less than stellar reputation. Ratner was a director for hire who clearly didn't understand the characters to the same degree Singer did. X-Men The Last Stand was shorter, faster, and way more popcorn-laden.
Charles always wanted to build bridges.
It was mauled by fans and critics alike, and even as a kid I distinctly remember being sorely disappointed with it following up X2. It was probably one of the first times I'd gone to see something at the cinema, and really honestly knew in my heart that this movie I was tremendously excited for, that I was rooting for, sucked arse. But is it really that bad? Well, yes and no. A lot of this film disappointed due to expectations. Cyclops and Jean were often overshadowed by Wolverine. This movie was set to do the Dark Phoenix storyline, the definitive Scott and Jean story. The previous movies had hinted at the younger generations joining the fray. This movie's marketing saw more X-Men suited up than ever before. They were set to introduce Beast after X2's Blink and You'll Miss It cameo. This was promised as the epic ending to a narrative set up by the blast at the end of X1 and Jean's subsequent death in X2. There was a lot riding on it. There was an expectation of structure. Solid Snake's X2 script was tight. It involved multiple villains with various motivations, but it all sought to divide and conquer the X-Men before their eventual reunion in a blistering third act. In the BTS for X2, the series was referred to as a saga, meaning that multiple installments would come to pass. That felt right for a superhero team that could hold its own as a cinematic universe on the scale of the early MCU phases. By the time X3 rolled around, it was being touted as the final installment in a trilogy, and felt incredibly rushed in doing so. The biggest problem with the movie is that it tries to condense the Dark Phoenix storyline that had been built up across the series, alongside a Mutant Cure storyline, all in roughly 90 minutes. Trying to honour two huge comic book plots, the re-emergence of Big Bad Magneto, the older X-Men, the teen X-Men, and the whole host of New Mutants, meant this film was nowhere near the polish and finesse of X2, and the juggling act that it was able to pull off. There was also an expectation of tone that was created in the previous movies.
My boy, the great illusionist. She took a power drill to her left temple in an attempt to bore the images out.
Stryker's enslaved, docile, but incredibly powerful son, Jason, is one of the darkest hallmarks of the old movies.
William, this is your son. What have you done?
No, Charles. My son is dead.
They didn't shy away from the abuse or persecution mutants faced in the comics, and brought a sobering touch of reality to those pages. X-Men The Last Stand starts off with a grim scene showing a young Angel mutilating himself to keep his mutation a secret. It's the kind of darkness that would have been right at home in the first two movies, and is something you'll never see under Disney's handling of the property going forward. Unfortunately, that scene did not set a precedent for the rest of the movie, which largely fumbles its political allegories involving mutant powers and the so-called mutant problem.
You can let me out of here, I need a pee.
The tone switch up was incredibly jarring, and it's hard to see this film as a follow-up to the first two.
Come on!
The way the action is filmed is much more light-hearted, complete with ball gags.
Grow those back.
Would Juggernaut have given in to memes in the last two movies?
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
The heroes banter and bicker mid-battle.
I thought you were a diplomat.
As Churchill said, there comes a time when all men must... you get the point!
In fact, I'd say the finale especially is where it feels really like a proto-MCU style. I mean, just watch this entrance.
Don't ever do that again.
That feels like the kind of rousing action moment we'd see in the Avengers, not a sequel to X2. Although that Wolverine entrance is pretty sweet. All those promo pics of the X-Men suited up, that was all baloney. Scott dies in the first 20 minutes, he never suits up, Angel never suits up and barely factors into the finale at all, Rogue suits up very briefly at the start and then decides to get the cure and also sits out the finale.
This isn't what I wanted.
It felt really undercooked to have so many X-Men to play with, and yet the finale only features a team of Wolverine, Storm, Beast, Colossus, Iceman, and Kitty Pryde. That's a pretty good team, no doubt, but in the context of the whole series, it's a slap in the face. Where's Cyclops? Where's Rogue? Where's Nightcrawler? Where's Angel? They were all over the bloody posters. Why would you do me dirty like that, movie? This was the first time I can remember actively feeling shortchanged and deceived by a movie's marketing. My child self could not work out why they could possibly snap all these promo pics of the X-Men in costume if the finished movie wouldn't feature them at all.
But I say we are the cure. Conflict between...
The trailers were moody and seemed to evoke a tone from the previous movies that was nowhere to be found in the finished film.
There have always been moments when the course of history shifted.
Honestly, it drove me crazy. This film has a lot to answer for. One thing I will say is that killing off Scott Summers, Jean Grey and Professor Charles Xavier was pretty ballsy and something I think the film doesn't get enough credit for. For a supposed grand finale, it has more gumption in killing off its characters than most of the MCU, which couldn't commit to killing anyone important in Age of Ultron or Civil War or even really Infinity War. I mean, everybody's back, aren't they, in some variant form one way or the other. Yes, these characters all eventually returned, but unlike the MCU, it wasn't part of an ongoing plan, it was a gear shift 8 years later. At the time of The Last Stand, this was meant to be it for the main X-Men movies, and I think it's cool that so many of them fall, adding some genuine stakes as we go into the finale.
Would have killed the professor if he'd given me the chance.
Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know.
It also has moments of brilliance due to these parts, like when Magneto says that he would never want Charles Xavier to die and that it's a shame that he had to for the mutant cause. When we go back and see the young Xavier and Magneto played by Fassbender and McAvoy, it really adds more texture to that relationship to see how Magneto would deal with him outliving Xavier. He's not happy about it at all. It's probably one of the movie's best lines.
My single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live.
It's also a very satisfying parallel to a similar line said by Magneto at the end of Days of Future Past.
All those years wasted fighting each other, Charles. To have a precious few of them back.
To be honest, all of the best moments and lines in the movie come from Magneto.
In chess, the pawns go first.
He flipped a truck 2 years before the Joker made it cool. And of course, he just gags every other mutant that dares to criticise him.
You're so proud of being a mutant. Where's your mark?
I have been marked once, my dear, and let me assure you, no needle shall ever touch my skin again.
Ian McKellen is such a goat. It takes a proper actor to make levitating a bridge look this cool. I love the way he brushes his gloves together before he does it. Magneto, what a tank, forever and always. Where the movie falters is how it feels like certain characters deemed important before are now suddenly inconsequential. Wolverine, Magneto, Xavier, Jean Grey and Storm all still have their part to play, but characters like Rogue and Mystique and Cyclops just drop off the map in favour of new characters or promoted supporting characters. It really doesn't help when the movie is already in a completely different place tonally and narratively speaking.
You never should have left.
Tying together this cheesier, more light-hearted tone is the score. John Ottman had a rousing theme of his very own, but there were also lots of sombre and more poignant tracks in the first two movies that really accentuated the grim proceedings. John Powell's new theme sucks in comparison, and the overall score does away with any of that darkness. Even if the movie had just kept the main theme song, it would have tied it in better as a trilogy. I think The Last Stand might be the reason I harp on about the scores so much in things like No Way Home. It really makes a difference when you keep up with the music and certain pieces remain tied to certain characters. Stripping this movie of the Ottman theme in place of that awful thumping new theme was one of the movie's worst decisions. The Dark Phoenix storyline could have worked and filled the runtime twice over. Even more frustrating is that when it works well. Wolverine's arc, becoming a leader in the absence of Charles, Scott and Jean, actually flows really well from X1 to this.
Then help us. Fight with us.
Fight with you, or join the team, be an X-Man. We lost Scott. We lost a professor. If we don't fight now, everything they stood for will die with them. I'm not gonna let that happen.
He galvanises the remaining X-Men, and you totally buy that he would become this person after all these experiences.
Then we stand together. X-Men.
I know people don't see Wolverine as a leader like Cyclops or Cap, but in the context of the movies, it really works. Plus, the love triangle between Cyclops, Jean and Logan was pretty well done in the first two movies. It was appropriately tense and led to a good deal of friction between the heroes, rather than everyone being like college buddies. It pays off in this movie in a pretty epic scene at the end. Of course, it does then play into the trope that women with powers become too powerful and need to essentially be killed in order to save everyone.
Save me.
No. And always. I love
you. But that's a problem you need to take up with the original Dark Phoenix storyline in the first place. The aforementioned Cure arc really goes nowhere, although I will say it does provide a pretty incredible end for Magneto. Is there any fate worse in his eyes than ending up a human being? I think he'd rather be dead.
I'm one of them.
It's also a nice payoff to his treatment of Mystique earlier in the movie.
I'm sorry, my dear. You're not one of us anymore.
Even if, like Rogue, she is another long-standing character who is tossed by the wayside. I know that in the case of Rebecca Romijn and James Marsden, they had scheduling conflicts, but the end result is that it still sucks and we lose really important characters. When will studios learn to just wait a year? The action is a mixed bag. The energy to the Nightcrawler White House attack or the satisfying wirework and savagery of the Wolverine vs Deathstrike fight are nowhere to be seen in this one. However, there is a really sweet sequence involving Wolverine leaping about and stabbing various Z-list mutants in the forest from Silver Surfer. I love how this guy is fully committed to steaming at Wolverine even though he's shown he can shrug off and heal from all of his attacks. You gotta respect the fact he did not go gently into that good night. Ouch. Juggernaut underwhelms as the new Heavy, replacing Sabretooth and Deathstrike respectively. He throws down with Wolverine at the Grey Residence in what is a tense scene in terms of its story, but incredibly wet as an action set piece. Later, he chases Elliot Page through multiple rooms, which I think is one of the film's most memorable visuals, to be honest. On the subject of Kitty Pryde, the casting is perfect, and Paige was a welcome addition to Days of Future Past, but the love triangle subplot with Iceman just further seeks to push Rogue out of the picture. Look at Iceman just consoling them both, just being a good friend to both of them, totally not trying to play them.
Player. Big dick player.
Speaking of Days of Future Past, the Danger Room training sequence, yeah, it's pretty cool. For 2006, it was pretty mental to see superheroes in a Terminator-esque post-apocalypse, and we even get the Fastball special.
Now.
Damn it, Logan, don't do this!
Of course, Colossus has no character, so it kind of becomes even more maddening that he's in the finale and not Cyclops or Rogue, but I digress. He actually has less lines in this movie than in X2. The Last Stand does deliver A Last Stand. A big battle at the end with some sweet flaming cars, a Pyro vs Iceman one-on-one, not to mention Beast flipping around like crazy. They really nailed Beast in this movie, in a way that they never quite managed with Nicholas Hoult, no fault on the actor, and for some reason we're only allowed one awesome blue mutant in every movie. Beast and Nightcrawler in the finale was what we should have been treated to. Nightcrawler's absence from X3 is insane, but at least we got that pretty fun tie-in game. This was kind of the closest thing to an Avengers-style movie before the Avengers. We'd had team-up films before, but their finales, whilst effective, were relatively small. This was the first time we really had a massive group of villains with an army taking on the might of a superhero team. Funny that there's also 6 of them. I wonder who would win out of the Last Stand 6 and the Avengers 6. Comics wise, I think the X-Men have it, but in terms of the movies, I think the Avengers are taking that crown. Although with Storm, Wolverine, Colossus and Iceman, it wouldn't be an easy win. The X-Men certainly have a more diverse range of powers, but I'd say the Avengers 6 have more fighting ability. Who do you think would win? Let me know in the comments, I think this will be fun. Love a good matchup. So yeah, whilst the movie doesn't live up to the spectacle of the Avengers New York battle, it certainly paved the way for that kind of huge battle sequence in a superhero movie. This was at a time when those Marvel Ultimate Alliance style movies were just an absolute pipe dream, you have to remember. It's cool to see the X-Men throw down together in a way that we didn't really get again until Days of Future Past. I love First Class's finale, but the action isn't really the selling point there.
This is what we're going to do.
Overall, I don't think it's quite as awful as I remember. Divorcing it from the expectations of seeing all the X-Men together and the tone set by X2, it's a serviceable superhero movie with some fun moments and compelling characters. Does it hold a candle to X2, First Class, Logan or Days of Future Past? Hell no, but it is better than X-Men Apocalypse, The New Mutants and the second attempt at Dark Phoenix. X-Men Dark Phoenix. At least this movie flies by and has fun. That movie is a laborious exercise to get through. I think if you watch it in isolation from the previous movies, in the same way some of the Avengers solo movies switch up the tones from the previous installments, then you're left with a movie that probably sits somewhere in between the middling entries in that franchise. I'd certainly rather see Wolverine and Storm lead the X-Men than, I don't know, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Thor Love and Thunder, The Eternals or She-Hulk. Quality-wise, I'd liken it to Iron Man 2 or Thor the Dark World. A just fine superhero movie that would probably entertain for a few hours, but won't have the lasting impact of a Guardians or Raimi Spider-Man.
Oh, that sucks.
A big thank you to my full fat tier patron, Dr. Chike. If you'd like to donate money to my Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/fullfatvideos. If you'd like to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos. And if you'd like to find me on Twitter, you can find me at fullfatvideos.